I call him the inventor of narco-terrorism. He had the audacity to drop leaflets at the car bomb sites. We prefer a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. I've killed all those innocent people because Colombia, I am at war with you. He was taking credit, no doubt about it. My initial reaction was, how do we attack this? I mean, you're looking at the biggest narco trafficker in the world, but we never realized that violence that he had behind him. The brutality, the barbaric side of him is something I will never understand.
You're out on helicopters flying around, going on mountain patrols, patrolling the valleys. You're just trying to follow up on any lead you could. I've been a cop since 1975. That's the closest I've ever come to burnout personally.
Workers in Colombia are cleaning up damage from 4 powerful bombs apparently planted in response to this week's government crackdown. Police are warning many influential Colombians that the cocaine kingpins have marked them for death.
The search became a war because of all the police officers that Pablo killed. It got personal.
Decirle que si esos 2 muchachos no me aparecen, le mato la mamá y los vecinos a esa que a mí nunca en la gran vida me van a coger y que yo desde la selva los mando matar a todos.
Maintaining your professionalism, you're thinking, if I encounter Pablo Escobar, I've got no problem pulling the trigger on this guy.
I started my DA career in Austin, Texas. I was doing a lot of undercover work.
On the ground, man. On the ground.
And I was dealing with the street aspect of the distribution.
I got it.
To me, 4 ounces of coke, a couple of ounces of meth were busting the streets was great. Like, wow, I had never experienced this. After 4 years, when I get to Colombia, I'm assigned the Medellin cartel investigation. I was in for a big awakening.
High in the Andes Mountains of southwest Colombia, the Indians have for centuries grown and cultivated these small privet-like trees. Their produce is so sought after that people lose their fortunes and sometimes their lives in pursuit of its beguiling properties.
A monkey will bar press for a cocaine reward and continue to bar press for thousands and thousands of times, even though it's dying of hunger and there's food in the cage. It will prefer cocaine to food that'll keep it alive. It'll prefer cocaine to a receptive female. It'll prefer cocaine to water in the cage, even though it's dying of thirst.
We formed an informal task force in Colombia at that time. My first partner was Gary Sheridan. Gary and I used to just visit Medellin. We would not stay there. We'd go there maybe on a weekly basis. And I always remember when they would pick us up at the airport, it'd be about 3 or 4 cars. And I remember all the cops used to put their guns on their thighs. And I'm like saying, hey, they'd always tell Gary, y'all got guns? He says, yeah. get them out. Like, I wasn't used to this. So we'd drive around with 3 or 4 cars and everybody was armed to the teeth. In 1988, to manufacture a kilo of cocaine was about $1,000. And the cartel had about 15 to 20 humongous cocaine laboratories in the jungles of Colombia.
This is lab number 2. It's a chemical site and refining plant.
These labs were little towns. They were operated by 60, 80 people. They had schedules. There were the precursor chemicals, the potassium permanganate, acetic anhydride, anything that's needed to make cocaine.
How many you got, Javier?
This 55-gallon container is hydrogen peroxide.
Cocaine.
So it's about $3,000 to $4,000 to transport it to the United States. So your initial investment on 1 kilo of cocaine was about $5,000. Once that kilo hit the market in Miami, it was going anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000. If you take it to New York, anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000. And if you take it to Europe, it was over $100,000. All of this cocaine was being controlled by Pablo Escobar. So we started asking, who is this guy, Pablo Escobar Gaviria?
Every multinational has a board of directors. These 3 men are the world's top cocaine executives, the Medellin cartel. Jorge Luis Ochoa is the cartel's number 2 man. Jose Rodriguez Gacha, who's 40, is the 3rd man on the drug totem. The chairman of the board is Pablo Escobar, who at 39 is reputed to be the world's 14th richest person. Escobar's office in Medellin is known as the bunker for fairly obvious reasons. The high walls and armed guards are designed to keep out the enemy. Escobar's ranch is a monument to his illegal trade. The plane over the gate is the first he used to transport illegal drugs.
So Pablo goes into this neighborhood where people are literally living on the edge of a trash dump. He builds low-cost housing and lets people live there for free. He provides them with food. He builds medical clinics, soccer fields. He gives them money. So think about it. If you come from a situation like that, and now all of a sudden your mom's got a roof over her head, you got running water, you've got electricity, what are you going to think about the guy? He wasn't a Robin Hood for these people. He manipulated those people because when he needed his new Sicarios, where did he go back to?
I think what drove Pablo was he did not want to get extradited to the United States. And remember, there was no extradition with Colombia at this point. So we were saying, guys, we got to bring back extradition. We got to go after this guy, Pablo Escobar.
Why were the Colombian drug lords so afraid of extradition?
I think part of it is folklore. They surmise that in the United States, a prison cell is a real prison cell, which it is.
This is something that the drug bosses fear tremendously, extradition. Will it work? Can it happen?
It can happen. It has happened before. Extradition was canceled after Colombian drug bosses attacked the Supreme Court in Colombia, killing most of the Supreme Court justices. Since that time, there has been no extradition of the Colombians to this country.
The president at this time was named Virgilio Barco Vargas. Great president. His term is running out. The presidential candidate is a person by the name of Luis Carlos Galan. One of his platforms was on bringing back extradition. Likeable, Colombians loved him, they worshiped him. I call him the John F. Kennedy of Colombia.
Conseguiré su imperio criminal eliminándome a mí, pero están completamente equivocados porque a los hombres se les puede eliminar, pero a las ideas no. Y al contrario, cuando se elimina a veces a los hombres, se robustecen las ideas.
August 1989. Right outside Bogota, Galan is campaigning. And he's up on stage. Escobar has him assassinated in front of hundreds of people. I always remember it was on a Friday night. We're at a bar, and I remember the waitress comes in crying and running. Colombia has just declared martial law. Everybody needs to get out of here. That same night, the president of Colombia, Barco Vargas, calls the U.S. Embassy. He says, I am bypassing Congress. I have just authorized extradition on my own decree. And we're like, what did you do? He said, under my administrative authority, I want to start extraditing everybody as soon as we can.
They came by the thousands, lining the streets of Bogota as a last salute to the man they hoped would one day be their president. For many Colombians, 46-year-old Luis Carlos Galan was the answer to several years of terror and violence spawned by the nation's drug traffickers. Most inspired by Galan's anti-drug crusade were many of Colombia's young people, like 20-year-old Eduardo Garcia.
He wanted to give us a country without drugs, a country without corruption. He wanted to give us Colombia.
In Colombia alone, cocaine killers have gunned down a leading statesman, murdered almost 200 judges and 7 members of their Supreme Court. The besieged governments of the drug-producing countries are fighting back. Our message to the drug cartels is this: the rules have changed.
DEA had stepped up to the plate. Our intel people send us down tons of analysts. We started creating arrest search packages. We extradite all these people in front of the world. This infuriated Pablo Escobar. I tell people that the term narco-terrorism was coined by Pablo Escobar.
Los políticos luchan por la imagen. Entonces, la imagen que se necesita ahora es la imagen de la paz. Entonces hay que hacer la guerra muy duro. Ellos no se van a echar para atrás ahora, pues, porque ellos creen ahora que estamos en Panamá debajo de todo va. O quién sabe dónde estamos escondidos, ¿cierto? Que nos jueces y que todo el mundo ya va a ir a caminar tranquilo porque no va a pasar nada. Entonces lo que tenemos que hacer, hermano, es arregliar duro, darle duro a la cosa, porque esto, la única forma de solución es una paz compensada. Pero hay que luchar, hermano, hay que poner todo el corazón para esto y nos vamos a morir todos, nos morimos todos.
We had never seen car bombs. We started seeing 10, 15 car bombs on a daily basis. We saw the emergence of bounties on police officers. For every uniformed police officer that they killed, the Sicario would make $100. I remember we caught one of them and admitted to about 10 killings. And I remember this kid was like 16 years old. He says, you know what? We don't expect to live beyond 22. If I kill 5, I make $500. And I get my money, I give most of it to my mother. As long as I have a little to buy some beer and some blue jeans and a nice pair of tennis shoes, I'm happy.
It may have been a bomb that blew up a plane in Colombia today. The Boeing 727 of Avianca Airlines had just taken off from Bogota on a domestic flight. 107 people were on board, including one American. There were no survivors.
Pablo's plan was to weaken Colombia. I'm going to kill as many people as I can. That way, I will negotiate. That's what he always wanted, to negotiate his surrender. What happened at this point, Escobar said, I'll stop all my killings, all my assassinations, my kidnappings, under 2 conditions. That you stop extraditing people and that I surrender at my own prison. I take my prison guards with me. I'll take my assassins. That way they protect me. And sadly, the government of Colombia agreed.
What kind of guarantees, Mr. President, have you that he won't just continue to run his drug operation from inside that area of his confinement, which we should note amounts to essentially a 3-room suite?
We will take every step is necessary just to get him out of business. We will take all the decisions. We will monitor his communications. We will monitor his visits. And we are sure he will be out of business.
When he self-surrendered, we all felt we had lost. All the innocent people getting killed, the police officers getting killed, Minister of Justice, presidential candidates, all for nothing.
A 7 años de persecución, de atropellos y de luchas, deseo sumarle todos los años de cárcel que sean necesarios para contribuir a la paz de mi familia, a la paz de Colombia, al fortalecimiento del respeto por los derechos humanos, al fortalecimiento del poder civil y al fortalecimiento de la democracia de mi querida patria colombiana. Pablo Escobar Gaviria, Envigado, Colombia, junio 19 de 1991.
I got to Bogota in June of 1991. Javier had already been there for 3 years. I'd been in country 3 days when Pablo self-surrendered to the government. I always like to think that he heard Steve Murphy was in town, so he better give up. I just spent 4 years in Miami. That was very eye-opening. We did one deal where my partner was shot and the informant was killed. So you've already been involved in some pretty strenuous, exciting activities. But to go to Colombia, you have that feeling that you're sticking your head in the lion's mouth now. You jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. My first year there was when Escobar was in prison.
El padre García Herrero reveló que el próximo domingo dará su primera misa en la cárcel de Envigado, con Pablo Escobar presente, en la que le va a proponer confesarse, arrepentirse de sus pecados y recibir la comunión.
Vamos a estar cercanos allá en el altar. Nos estaremos mirando y estaremos mirando el sacramento.
So I was working with Javier and another partner, Gary Sheridan, at the time. These guys were very patient with me, giving me an opportunity to work on my Spanish, to learn more about the organization, who's responsible for what. Luckily for me, Javier was an outstanding teacher.
It's a stressful job. How did you break the ice?
Probably involved alcohol.
Yeah, a lot of alcohol. We had a TKO program, a Targeted Campaign Organization Leaders. We were writing 10 to 15 actionable teletypes on a daily basis, and all related to the Medellin cartel. Distributors in the States, money launderers in the States. And that was the whole concept of dismantling the Medellin cartel.
You're working hand in hand daily with the Colombian National Police. You'd all pile into the Huey helicopters and they'd fly you off and they'd drop you off on top of a mountain and you'd spend all day out on patrol looking for anything associated with Escobar or labs or whatever you could find. You were going out meeting informants in different locations. The Colombian National Police would call one of us and say, hey, we've got somebody that wants to talk to you. You don't want to bring people like that into the U.S. Embassy. So we would go out to these safe houses and you'd sit there and just do detailed debriefings and collect the information they had.
During one of the raids, we took one of the cars and it belonged to his sister. In the dashboard, there was a note that says, if you're thinking of stealing this car, do not. This is Pablo Escobar and this car belongs to my sister. Avoid problems. You know, that's the best insurance a car could ever have. He's in his prison about a year. Some of the sicarios are out one night and they come across about $10 million that's buried in the ground. So they took it back to Escobar at the prison and said, hey, boss, look what your two favorite lieutenants been holding on. That infuriates him. He brings in the two family members. He has them killed. They're in prison. We're able to take that information back to the government of Colombia to take Escobar out of his own prison and send him back to a jail cell in Bogota.
En este caso los militares, a toda la nacionalidad colombiana, que si el gobierno incumple con los pactos de hace un año, nosotros le daremos el pie de lucha, como antes lo estábamos haciendo, y que no es culpa de los extraditables, sino del gobierno, que el país no entre en una conmoción, sino en un estado de guerra.
Pablo Escobar was king of kings in the Colombian worldwide cocaine business, a man so powerful he arranged his own luxurious prison when he finally surrendered to authorities. But tonight, he is out of that prison again after a bizarre showdown between his guards and government security agents. NBC's Brian Ross tonight has some exclusive details for us. Brian?
Tom, Pablo Escobar is, without a doubt, the most powerful and ruthless of all the drug bosses. And his final words to a Colombian official before he escaped were, "We are at war again."
If he had just done his time, he could have been a free man within the country of Colombia. I mean, he was a multi-billionaire. That should be plenty of money for anybody to live off of. So that's how he could have won, is to do his time, gotten out of prison, been free and clear of all charges, and then just kick back and enjoy life. But his ego wouldn't allow him to do that. In 1992, Pablo escaped. During that year's time is when I became partners with Javier Pena. Our assignment was to focus on the Medellin cartel and do everything we could to dismantle the entire organization and target Pablo Escobar. When he escaped from his prison, that's when it got real busy.
The manhunt continues. Today, the government of Colombia rejected Pablo Escobar's terms for surrender.
La permanencia en la cárcel de Envigado y el control de visitas.
In taped demands made public today and yesterday, the escaped drug lord lists among his conditions for surrender a return to his plush prison with the same guards as before, many of whom are suspected of helping Escobar escape.
This was the original building that was built 1 year ago. That's Escobar's private room. He's got a little veranda up here. The room next to his is Roberto Escobar, his brother. And where you see the mirrors or the glass here on the bottom, this is where they had a little bar. We're at Pablo Escobar's, sitting on his veranda here, which is right outside his private room there. There's some police still working on searching the area. The view that Pablo had out here is just amazing. You can tell right now it's a little hazy, but you can see all of Medellin. All this place, we need to point out, when the military hit it, when Escobar came in, they broke a lot of the stuff. A lot of the stuff was also stolen by the military during Escobar's escapes. And a lot of these holes that you see here are just holes made by the cops in looking for the supposedly tunnels in this area. The bar, or the little discotheque that Escobar had in here, the site of many parties, and here's a picture of some of them. This is one of the prison guards here behind the bar. This person here is Popeye, one of Escobar's favorite sicarios, John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez.
I won't call it a palace, but it certainly isn't like any prison I've ever seen. You've got color-coordinated draperies and upholstery in his suite. You've got modern appliances. You got an audio-visual center. He's got his own little office with a fake fireplace behind it in his cell. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The first 6 months, we were just right behind the guy. We were already working very closely with the Colombian National Police. What we did is we joined forces once again with the Bloque de Búsqueda, which translates into the search block. This was a 600-man force of Colombian National Police officers. We were stationed at a place called the Carlos Holguin School in Medellin. It's almost like being in a prison ourselves. We're living in a place with no hot water. We're eating rice and potatoes 3 times a day. You know, if you're lucky, you might get a piece of leather that they call steak once a week.
I had worked with the leaders of the search block since 1988. They would always tell me, Javier, we're not in this to seize dope. We're not in this to seize money. We're in this to kill Pablo Escobar. I know there was money being offered to some of those police officers.
Some of these police officers' families were being threatened. Escobar coined the famous phrase, ¿Quieres plata o quieres plomo? You want some money or you want a bullet?
Me tienen desaparecidos dos muchachos. Dile que si esos dos muchachos no me aparecen, le mato la mamá y los vecinos a esa Es que están confundiendo la formalidad con la nobleza con la debilidad. Mándeme decir a esa el coronel Martínez, que así se llame ese plomo es lo que le voy a dar de aquí en adelante y le pasa alguna cosa a los dos muchachos. Plomo es lo que le va a sobrar a ese que esos me responden a mí por los dos muchachos.
You're out on helicopters flying around, going on mountain patrols, patrolling the valleys. You're just trying to follow up on any leads you could.
El bloque de búsqueda allanó hoy una finca ubicada en la zona semirural de Envigado y capturó a 4 personas en un operativo fugaz realizado este mediodía en el sur de Medellín.
We were getting frustrated in the fact that there were so many close calls. You're getting all these tips in, but the tips are misleading tips. By that time, we were getting to the point where we felt like we weren't even getting close to him. And you're just thinking in the back of your mind, is this thing ever going to end? Towards December 1993, I'm leaving my family back in Bogota for weeks at a time while Javier's off running around and he's trying to do the same thing. I've been a cop since 1975. That's the closest I've ever come to burnout personally.
In Colombia, the manhunt for Pablo Escobar intensifies. With the help of U.S. intelligence, crack police units are raiding suspected safe houses where the billionaire drug lord could be hiding out. U.S. officials say they're intercepting cellular phone calls they hope will provide leads. Top drug enforcement agents now believe Escobar is moving frequently.
His power base has definitely been eroded, and he's definitely on the run. I mean, they're hot on his trail in Colombia.
We were living and breathing and sleeping this thing. Very, very long days. Neither one of us was allowed to leave country at the same time. One of us always had to be in the country of Colombia during that time. Nobody ever questioned our work ethic. It got to the point where I would stop by the nurse's station about once every other week just to have my blood pressure checked to make sure everything's okay. Colonel Martinez's son was a lieutenant with the Colombian National Police. His son was using the directional finding equipment. So you had a father-son team on the good guy's side, and they were going up against Pablo Escobar. And the way they intercepted Pablo was when he was talking to his son, Juan Pablo. Pablo always knew he only had a few minutes to talk on the phone before the triangulation would happen and we could pinpoint his location. So he had a taxi, and even if he's on his phone talking and you triangulate on that signal, by the time you get troops there, he could be 5 miles down the road. You don't know which direction he went in, so it was very hard to do.
Los Pepes, it's a vigilante group that was made of ex-Escobar associates. There was a lot of insinuation that they were working with the police. We never saw it.
This group basically turned the table on Pablo Escobar. They used his tactics to combat him. And those tactics included them targeting his properties. They targeted his attorneys at one point.
They are fighting Escobar dirty. The way Escobar fought them, killed their bosses, killed whoever was associated with these trafficking groups, they started doing the same tactics. They killed famous horses, teachers who were involved with teaching Escobar's kids. They started going after his family.
Mensaje para mi hijo Pablo donde quiera que esté. Todos te queremos mucho. Sabemos que por tu seguridad no podremos verte. Estamos bien y confía en el Santo Niño de Atocha, en María Auxiliadora, que con las almas del purgatorio son tus fieles guardianes. 1000 abrazos de todos y recibe la bendición de tu mamá. Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo. Bueno.
¿Cuál es la otra?
So Pablo Escobar was very afraid for his family, his wife and 2 kids. First time he tried to get them out to Miami. We were able to stop them. Then the second time he gets them out to Germany.
In a bizarre effort to find a secure haven, members of Escobar's family have fled Colombia. Media reports claim that the hasty departure was part of a deal with the government. Escobar would surrender only if his family's safety was guaranteed first.
We had an agent on a plane, went to Germany. We convinced the German authorities to turn them back.
So they were brought back to Colombia. And so we were starting to feel a little more excited that maybe this thing is going to heat up again. So on December 2nd, 93, it was my turn up in Medellin, and Lieutenant Martinez goes out with his directional finding equipment, trying to wait for Pablo to come up on the phone. Pablo comes up on the telephone. He's being intercepted, and we know he's talking to his son, Juan Pablo. For whatever reason, Pablo stayed on the phone too long that day.
Bueno, ante la situación que han vivido con el viaje a Alemania y el anterior a Estados Unidos,
So Lieutenant Martinez is out, and he ended up on the street where Pablo was at. As he's driving by, he looks up, and sure enough, his gauges start pointing to this house on the left. And as he goes by, he looks up, and lo and behold, there's a guy on the telephone, looks amazingly like Pablo Escobar. They turn around and come back, and sure enough, the equipment is pointing now to the right. And as they drive by, Pablo looks at him while he's talking on the phone. After years and years of problems of drug trafficking and murder and extortion, the lieutenant that pinpointed the location saw Pablo with phone in hand. So I'm back at the Carlos Holguin School in Medellin, the base where the search block of the Colombian National Police group was located. I went over to the colonel's office to find out what was going on, because you knew something was happening. I stayed back in the doorway. He's on the radio passing out instructions. And basically what you heard is that they've located Pablo. Colonel Martinez is instructing them, hit the location, let's find out if it's Pablo. Let's don't take a chance on losing him. They sent 2 of their officers around to the backside of the house. And 5 officers kicking the front door. One officer, as he was running up the steps, tripped and fell, which probably saved his life because Pablo shot at him at that exact moment. When Pablo gets to the 3rd level, he jumps out the window. The bodyguard jumps off the roof. 2 police officers engage him in a gun battle and shoot him dead. Pablo heard the gunshots and realized that he was in crossfire. There's no information for a minute. And then the next thing that comes up on the radio is, Viva Colombia, Pablo is dead. When we finally got out on the roof there, the Daheen guys came to me. For whatever reason, they called me Steak. So it came out to Stick was kind of my nickname there. And they're like, Steak, could you take photographs of us with the body? And honestly, you kind of get caught up in the moment and the elation, realizing that it's finally over. So I'm taking pictures of everybody, and you can imagine that we were all happy this was over. But then they're like, Steak, come and get your picture made also. So that's how the picture came about.
Well, the ambassador calls me out of Medellin, says, have you ever got on a plane, you're going to Miami? Because there's an informant that's going to tell you where Escobar is. Sir, we were very close. It was like the day before. I get to Miami, and you know how I found out Pablo Escobar gets killed? The informant is on the phone. The guy who's supposed to tell me where Escobar was. He says, Javier, they just killed Pablo Escobar.
They elbowed their way through, and one sister went up and looked at the bodyguard who had died on the ground. And Pablo's body was on the roof. And she began laughing and looking at the police officers and saying, you have messed up again. This is not Pablo Escobar. Once again, you have killed the wrong person. She was very abusive towards them and laughing at the police. The police allowed her to go on and through her tirade. And after a few moments, when she started to walk away, they basically told her, look on the roof at the other body. Then she realized her brother was dead.
Good evening. To the rest of the world, he was a notorious drug lord, a ruthless fugitive, and a killer. To the people of his hometown, Pablo Escobar was a kind of cocaine Robin Hood. And when he was buried today, after losing a final shootout with police, it was chaos.
The crowd estimated at 20,000 gathered today on the outskirts of Medellin to bury Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar. People pushed and shoved and finally overran the police, if only to get a glimpse of the drug lord. All the while chanting, Pablo, Pablo.
You got to understand that we had been right there with the Colombian National Police. In fact, during that 18-month period, there were 143 Colombian National Police officers killed as a direct result of this one investigation.
It was a victory for us, for all the people he killed, all our friends. I lost some good friends. It was a victory for everybody.
My personal feeling was pretty much elation, realizing that it's finally over. The citizens of Colombia are now safe from this guy. He's not going to be responsible for any more indiscriminate bombings, indiscriminate killing of innocent people, indiscriminate killing of children who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with their parents when one of his bombs went off. It was just a good day in the history of Colombia.
The majority of the people in Colombia are great people. It's just that small percentage of traffickers that ruins it. I always said the traffickers are good, but the police are better.
The most hated man in America. He stole from thousands of investors $50 billion.
The world's biggest Ponzi scheme.
This man has stolen the hard work of so many people.
A group of local carpenters, pension money lost.
He's an evil man. He didn't just do it to us. He did it to charities. He did it to friends.
This guy was a financial sociopath.
Now, of course, you listen to them. They're living out of dumpsters and they don't have any money and so on and so forth. And I'm sure it's a traumatic experience to some, but I made a lot of money for a lot of people. My business was a successful business for 35 years. I had more than enough money If you think that I woke up one morning and say, well, listen, I want to be able to buy a boat and a plane and this is what I'm going to do, that's wrong. It's what I could extricate myself after a very short period of time, but the whole thing sort of spun out of control. They had a sense something was not right. But everybody was greedy. Everybody wanted to go on, and I just went along with it. It was a nightmare. Imagine not being able to tell anybody. I destroyed the family. They said, why did you need to do this? I said, I don't know. I cried for well over 2 weeks after he died. And not a day goes by that I don't suffer.
My loyalty to Bernie was fostered because I knew him my entire life. I was 13 when I met him. I'm now 70.
So would you raise your right hand, please? Put your left hand on the Bible. I swear the testimony you're about to give you the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
This is a CBS News special report. Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Couric here in New York, where Bernard Madoff has just been sentenced for the biggest investment fraud in Wall Street history.
Madoff recently confessed he had been running basically a giant Ponzi scheme for years, whereby one set of investors are paid sometimes unreal returns out of money received from another. As Madoff stood silent, District Court Judge Denny Chin delivered the ruling everyone was waiting for: 150 years in prison with no possibility for parole.
An inmate at a federal prison. To hear the cost of this call, press 8 now.
Ernie. Yeah, hi, Steve. Hi.
So when Bernard Madoff's security starts, what's your goal at that point?
Money, to make money. I had some friends that were stockbrokers at the time. It became like a challenge for me to try and break into the business. We started trading in over-the-counter stocks. My original capital was $500. The SEC never even heard of anybody going into business with $500. They had to have a special interview with me to make sure that I wasn't out of my mind. And I realized from a very early stage that the market is a whole rigged job.
Yeah, right.
It was always a business where you had to have an edge.
The investment advisory business operated quite separate.
He began with his wife, Ruth, as sort of the bookkeeper. They began primarily by using Ruth's father, who's an accountant, as a referral.
My father-in-law formed a group of accounting clients, put in a certain amount of money each. In 1962, I bought this small group of retail clients over-the-counter stocks at $2 a share. Right after I bought them, the market collapsed and the stocks went down to $0.50. All of a sudden, I was faced with these clients that were almost like sort of relatives of mine that had lost all their money.
I think he was very worried because his father had come close to really making a success. In his family, it was more about financial success than, say, in my family.
My father had a big successful business. He owned a company called Dodger Sporting Goods, and he invented, the Joe Palooka punching bags.
Oh, is that right?
And then, during the Korean War, there was a steel shortage. He couldn't get steel, and his business failed. I lived through that. You see your father, who you idolize, who lose everything. You get frightened about something like that happening, and then all of a sudden, I go through the same thing. I just It's just they handled it differently, that's all.
He was at an intersection between lies and truth. Rather than go back to these investors and say, you know, I really lost your money, I failed you, he covered it up. He took all the money his firm had made in those 2 years and bought those shares back, borrowed money from his father-in-law to recapitalize the firm, and never told them what had happened. So they, of course, thought, oh, this young man, he's the genius. He managed to navigate through this dreadful stock market problem in '62 and still preserve my money.
The impression was that if you got Bernie to take your money, he was doing you a big favor. Our connection with him was Ruth Madoff's sister and her husband. Those are my closest friends. People used to give the money to his father-in-law, who was the accountant, Saul Albert. I sent them a letter. It was something like, Dear Saul, we'd like to invest with you. We scraped together about $100,000 that my father left me. We're looking for this to take care of our sons, the future, and so on and so forth. Within a couple of years after starting this investment, I told my wife, I said, we're retiring. The Madoff thing was so good for so long that I looked for, where can I get more money to give Madoff? And I never, ever gave an inkling of a thought that there was something wrong with what Madoff was doing. Never.
One of the things that is so devastating to me now is we had a wonderful legacy, which my brother and both my sons helped build. They started out on the trading desk like everybody else. They had to prove themselves as traders, which they did for a few years, and then they took over running the trading desk. I was very proud of my sons. Mark was a very outgoing person, good schmoozer.
Wow. That was quite amazing.
My husband was just a genuinely nice, sweet, sensitive, handsome man.
Mark's hope was to, you know, take over the business someday. It was his life, it was his interest.
The question of when it became a fraud is fundamental to the Bernie Madoff mystery.
Through documents and testimony, we pretty much think it was in the 60s at some point.
Madoff put his sons in the legitimate business, in the trading business. And when people would come to the office, they would see this huge floor and say, this is a real thing here. The investment advisory business, the scam business, was separate. He had 3 floors in the famous Lipstick Building, and on the 17th floor is where the scam operated. In a room that was top secret, certain code access to get into the room, only certain people were allowed in.
It was as if 17 were a cave. It was a dark area. There was green screen terminal technology, which I hadn't seen in 25 years. There were dot matrix printers, which I hadn't seen in 25 years.
It was an incredibly orchestrated fraud, and in fact, he created phony books, phony records, phony account statements. But Mr. Madoff wasn't doing any of those trades.
Frank DePascali, he sort of ran the day-to-day operation for all the accounts, including the hedge funds. Everybody liked Frank. He was a nice kid and he was smart. Understand that I was aware of the fact that books and records were being generated that were false. Frank knew what was going on, and I knew what was going on, but nobody else knew for sure what was going on. And it was a total disaster.
Mathematically speaking, a Ponzi scheme eventually has to collapse upon itself.
It's a cash-eating monster. You need new cash to pay off the existing old investors.
In '92, I started taking European clients in, European banks and hedge funds. The chairman of Credit Suisse came down. The chairman of UBS came down. I had all of these major banks coming down and entertaining me. It is a head trip. You say to yourself, all right, all of a sudden these banks, which wouldn't give you the time of day, some of them all of a sudden are willing to give you $1 billion. By the mid to late 90s, they should have known there were red flags and so on and so forth. First of all, I wouldn't give them any facts about how much volume I was doing. Everybody wanted to know that. I was not willing to have them come up and do due diligence. When I said, you don't like it, take your money out. Which, of course, they never did.
Back in those days, I understand that Mr. Madoff didn't like his investors mentioning his name, let alone what he was doing. I met this individual, Thierry de la Villeche, and he was invested with Madoff. And the fact that he was a sailor and I was a sailor established some common ground and trust, I guess. He told me basically he was making 12 to 15% per year on this net for his clients. So I brought the return stream, the track record, back to Harry. And I said, Harry, if you can do this for me, we can make a lot of money.
It took me about 5 minutes to figure out that he was a fraud. I basically read his strategy description. Then I looked at his performance chart. It was a 45-degree angle, up. It never had variation like the market does. Then I did about 4 hours of modeling just to prove the math.
After 4 hours of work or so, he came up and said, Frank, this is a Ponzi scheme. I go back to de la Villeche. I said, what happens if you've got all your eggs with Bernie and he is a fraud? And Thierry says, he can't be. I've got all my money with him. I've got most of my family's money with him. Almost every royal family that I know has got the money with them. He says, almost every professional associate that I've ever dealt with all my life, I invested in them. We really have done our work, Frank. You just don't have all the facts. We have to state it. We were not any archangels of financial justice here. We were competitors.
When you have a bad player on the field, a dirty player, you want him removed from the playing field. And I tried to remove him from the playing field, but the referee wasn't listening. My team and I tried our best to get the SEC to investigate and shut down the Madoff Ponzi scheme with repeated, incredible warnings to the SEC that started in May 2000.
He was stonewalled every time he called them. I mean, it was, well, we got your stuff. We're investigating. We'll call you if we need you.
You just get a sense of an agency that could not imagine that this man they had respected and relied on for guidance and advice for decades could possibly be running a fraud.
As he becomes wealthier, he has his home in the south of France now. He has an office in Mayfair in London now. He's got a track record that people are whispering quietly about over the cocktails at the country club, and it's astonishing. As the world becomes more and more turbulent, Madoff looks like the sure thing, the quiet thing, the conservative, safe, sleep well at night thing.
That drew an awful lot of conservative investors to him, thinking that they were giving up high-flying returns to get the safety and consistency that Madoff gave them.
I was more of the old school. You know, I used to say to people, look, I don't need this. I was very cavalier. And to a certain extent, the more I said that, the more they wanted to do business with me.
The arrogance just fried Harry. So then he writes this letter in 2005 with the 28, 29 red flags on it.
in November 2005. I told the SEC exactly where to look, providing them with a long series of 29 red flags that any trained investment professional would have immediately understood.
I read it. I said, oh my God, they're going to be on this. You're giving it to them. You're giving them everything.
They asked me, where are the securities for the clients? And I said, at Depository Trust, under 646. That's my account name. And when I left that meeting, I figured that's it. They got me. You know, I lied to them and said they were at the depository, and I figured for sure they're gonna call the depository on Monday morning and find out the securities weren't there. It was quite easy for them to have done that. They just didn't check it. And they never did. That was a major screw up.
We begin our coverage tonight of what's been called the worst financial crisis in modern times, certainly the largest financial disaster in decades in this country, and perhaps the end of an era in American business.
Day after day of triple-digit losses, the Dow's worst week in its 112-year history.
We are faced with the prospect of a global meltdown.
In 2008, everything was coming unglued. Everybody wanted their money back. And I was the only liquidity pool in Wall Street at the time because unlike all hedge funds, my money was available, as far as the clients were concerned, literally within 7-day settlements for them.
Hello.
Hi, Bernie. It's Ahmed calling. How are you?
Good, Ahmed. How are you?
Good, good. I know I promised I wouldn't talk to you for 2 months, but I wanted to sort of request that we withdraw some amount from our accounts, well, today, and then the balance, of course, once the final picture is known.
Well, what numbers do you have so far, Ahmed?
Sure. So it looks like we'll need about 130 million for tomorrow. And then for the end of the month, Bernie, it is looking like it's going to be in excess of another 700 million.
700 million?
Yeah. It's been remarkable. We've seen a wholesale exodus. So we'll call you as soon as we have the final number and let you know. But I did want to let you know in advance that it was going to be a larger number this month.
He had about $250 million in the bank, and he was looking at $1.5 billion in redemptions due the following week. And that number was just going to increase because no money was coming in. It was all outbound, so it was doomed at that point.
I realized that I was dead. I realized that there was no way I was ever going to recover from any of this.
He was like preoccupied all the time, locked in his office doing figures, and he became obsessed with his blood pressure, obsessed with it.
At that stage, I was sort of in a panic about the whole thing. At the last minute, I was trying to return monies to employees there and some friends that worked there. because a lot of them had all their savings, and so on. I didn't know what to do. I felt bad because how am I going to pick out which people to send it back to? And I never sent it out.
The boys went into his office and shut the door. And I think there were raised voices. And then they got up and Bernie said, call the driver. And the three of them left.
So we got into my car, and my driver drove a few blocks to the apartment. That's when I broke down and I told them, I owe all this money out and I'm not going to be able to recover it, and so on and so forth. I was crying, and I remember took me in his arms. He just felt sorry for me at that stage. Mark was standing there in shock. Get in this picture, one day you think your father's running this multi-billion-dollar business and everything is fine and he's happy and they're happy, and all of a sudden the world comes crashing down. They immediately left. They went to a lawyer. The lawyer said, you got to turn your father in. And I never saw them again.
The next day, I came into work a bit later, maybe 9, and Eleanor was there, and she said, the FBI are downstairs. And I said, really? Like, why? She says, I don't know. I said, oh my God. Frank DeFiscali came up. He was white. He was shaking. We had no idea why until it came across the ticker at about 4:15.
If you work on a trading desk, stop what you're doing for 1 second before you walk out the door and clean your desk out for the day. Bernie Madoff has been arrested after he told senior employees yesterday that his business was a giant Ponzi scheme. He tried to distribute early bonuses to employees of his firms, prompting questions by senior employees. Mr. Madoff allegedly told employees he had a couple of $100 million left, wanted to distribute it before turning himself in to authorities. This all according to...
We were stunned. I remember we all looked at each other and we said, it's a mistake, it's not Bernie. It's an absolute mistake.
It was very hard to imagine the Bernie they knew to be the Bernie that did this. He was a guy that everybody loved, and he seemed to like them. It seemed unthinkable that he could do this to people. Destroy their lives that way. I still have a hard time processing it.
I guess I was leaving my office in Boston there, and my phone rang. It was Harry, and Harry was excited. The guy just blew up. I knew it was a fraud the whole time. He admitted it was a Ponzi scheme.
Since the news broke, I have not been able to get a full night's sleep. I wake up and contemplate it in the early hours of the morning, and I always think of the terrible tragedy.
My nephew, he called us. He said, Uncle
Steve, Bernie Madoff was arrested. I put on the news, and it was everywhere.
Bernard Madoff has been arrested and charged with running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. This is one of the biggest fraud cases ever.
The second I heard Ponzi scheme, I said, we are broke.
No, wait a second. And I said, I don't believe this. I think something is wrong, and I don't believe that this really happened. And then just that whole day was like a blur because we couldn't believe it. We woke up penniless, destitute, and nowhere to get money from him.
He betrayed not just his friends, but his closest friends and people who entrusted him with everything they had saved. He betrayed charities whose sole purpose with the funds they had was to do good. I think in the Bible we call it an abomination, an act so alien to our values and our natures that it cannot be understood or explained.
Stunned investors are still wondering today if anything is left of the billions they invested with Wall Street investor Bernard Madoff.
Madoff confessed to running a giant Ponzi scheme. Early investors were paid unreal returns out of money from other investors.
When I was arrested, I admitted that I was the one that did this and I was guilty and so on and so forth. And I didn't see any reason to go to trial, put my family through a trial, because it wasn't going to change anything.
What's he doing?
Mr. Madoff, what do you have to say for yourself? What do you have to say to the public, to your investors?
We were shocked that Judge Chin allowed him out on bail. He certainly had the means to flee and certainly the motivation to flee. He told us, "Oh, I'm glad I was caught." Now, no one's ever glad they're caught, but I do think he was just exhausted mentally and physically, and he just didn't flee.
It was unthinkable to me. Hate mail, phone calls, lawyers. It was just horrific.
The drama surrounding Bernie Madoff's alleged $50 billion scam has taken a tragic turn. Police say that a distinguished investor whose fund lost nearly $1.5 billion in the scheme has committed suicide.
Thierry Magon de la Villouche was well respected, a high-powered fund manager on Madison Avenue in Manhattan. Friends say since the Madoff scandal broke, de la Villouche has been subdued, and it all came to a head on Monday night when he asked the office cleaning crew to leave him alone after 7 p.m., that he had work to do overnight.
Then, sometime this morning, they found the man at his desk, cuts made to his wrist with a box cutter.
I was crushed, really crushed. Terry was a sailor, and he was a hunter. He could have taken himself out any way he wanted to if he wanted to just remove himself from the pressure. The man chose the method he did, watch himself bleed to death, slowly. In my mind only, as an act of atonement.
11 times when asked how does he plead, Bernard Madoff said guilty.
The judge heard the arguments and then immediately ruled that he should go to jail.
I'm listening to all these pundits say, oh, he's going away for life and he just wants to spare his family and he's going to do the time. That's not going to happen. The government needs him. He's the only one that can help them solve and get to the bottom of this mess.
They immediately started to say, well, listen, if you can cooperate and you can give us information as to who else was involved, that will work in your favor. I said, I'm not going to give you information about anybody else because, quite frankly, there was nothing for me to give them about anybody else from a criminal standpoint.
About halfway through, I realized this guy's just lying. So I told my boss, look, you guys can finish up here. I'm going up to his office and seeing what we have. We're talking 2,000-3,000 boxes, hundreds of computers, and that's kind of when we started the case. Just went through document by document, trying to see what was there.
Despite Madoff's silence, the investigation continues.
He's refusing to identify where the assets are or who his other co-conspirators are.
If those questions are not answered, then the government should go after absolutely everyone that they can go after, the sons, the brother, the wife, Ruth.
I didn't know. Bernie went to great lengths to not include the family in any of this. That was his biggest regret of anything, is how we were hurt.
My husband knew nothing. He was in pure shock.
You could see the betrayal on his face and in his body. He grew in a beard to try to disguise himself. He was physically hunched over, and he was destroyed.
Bernie Madoff is going to learn his fate today. His sentencing hearing begins at 10 a.m. Eastern Time.
The man had created an aura of financial stability, of a guru in the market, and it was a facade. And that's what I saw when he walked in the room. Emptiness.
Devoid of emotion, Madoff first spoke of his immediate family, none of whom were in attendance. How do you excuse lying to your brother and 2 sons, he asked. How do you excuse lying and deceiving a wife who stood by you for 50 years and still stands by you? Turning toward his victims, Madoff said simply, "I am sorry. I know that doesn't help you." Calling Madoff's crimes extraordinarily evil, District Court Judge Denny Chin noted he had not received even a single note or letter in support of Madoff. Then, as Madoff stood silent, Chin delivered the ruling everyone was waiting for. 150 years in prison, the absolute maximum, with no possibility for parole.
I heard the click of the handcuffs, which pleased me greatly. He was largely expressionless, as he always is. I feel at once strangely relieved and totally dissatisfied. He took away my ability to pay my rent, to eat. I'm on food stamps now. I scavenge in dumpsters. I can't buy medication. This sentence was handed to me on December 12th, and I will be living out the sentence until the day I die.
Now that Bernie Madoff is behind bars, investigators are focusing on his wife.
She has $69 million that they do not believe is hers.
As confessed swindler Bernie Madoff begins his 3rd day behind bars, questions now about who else may have been involved in the world's biggest Ponzi scheme and what happened to all that money. A complaint filed by the Massachusetts Secretary of State says Ruth Madoff transferred $15.5 million out of an account in the weeks before the scam unraveled, including $10 million on the day Madoff confessed to their sons.
Madoff's wife, Ruth, has agreed to surrender more than $80 million, including her New York penthouse, but will keep more than $2.5 million cash.
Ruth Madoff, who was in the apartment when we arrived, has vacated the residence. She has surrendered all personal property to the United States Marshal Service.
We're here in the Madoff penthouse here in New York City. This is the penthouse where Bernard Madoff spent the last days of his life as a free man. Bernard Madoff's desk, this is where he did most of his work. Great breakfast nook, marble countertops. Unfortunately, these were all purchased based on lies and deceit, but again, we hope that dark cloud has moved on.
I thought that possibly she should have gone to trial on a thing so she could have kept the homes and everything. She just didn't want to do it. She just was so devastated by the whole situation, and she was embarrassed and ashamed of what I did, and she said, I can't possibly live in any sort of luxury when everybody else is in such bad condition. And I understood that.
That, of course, won't begin to cover investors' losses, but we learned tonight Madoff's 2 sons may be forced to cough up some cash.
Trustee Irving Picard is poised to file civil complaints against Madoff's 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, who ran their father's trading division, and Peter Madoff, Bernie's brother and the company's chief compliance officer.
My belief is, yes, they knew. And the reason I believe that is they were officers of these companies and directors in certain instances in a very highly regulated environment.
Both my sons, they know for a fact that the market-making business, which is the business that they and my brother ran, was a successful business, and they understood that they were living off of that business. There's no secret bank account. You know, you're not going to find anything like that. There's no smoking gun here.
Call what you want. Conscious avoidance, willful blindness, they definitely should have known. The market-making business, the so-called legitimate side, was losing money left and right for years. What was making up the difference to fund it was cash coming in from the investment advisory business, the Ponzi business. They had fake investment statements from their own personal accounts that suited their needs at the time. They're applying for loans and whatnot. Those were in their own personal offices. So to say they didn't know something was amiss is problematic at best for them.
If you were those sons, wouldn't you be embarrassed to keep that money? They should give it all back. And if they don't give it all back, I think we have an obligation to go get it and take it all back.
We will pursue them as far as we can pursue them. And if that leads to bankrupting them, then that's what will happen.
Are you worried about losing your home, Mr. Madoff?
He knew nothing. Every single fight was about the same thing. He said to me, Stephanie, I don't have any clue what my father does. I just want to know what happens if he dies, what I'm supposed to do. And Bernie would always say the same thing. You do your job and I'll do mine.
Mark begged me to stop seeing Bernie. He was saying, how could you? How could you see a man that's done this to his own children, all our friends whose lives were ruined? And I knew all that, but I just couldn't let him go. I said that I was having a really hard time abandoning him while he's under a life sentence in prison. I visited him 4 times in 2 years. It wasn't as if I put up a tent outside the prison and saw him daily. I had no idea of the dire effect that that had on Mark.
Another stunning and dark chapter to the Bernie Madoff saga was written today when the oldest son of the disgraced financier who first alerted police to his father's multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme committed suicide, exactly 2 years after his father was arrested in a massive swindle.
Early Saturday morning, his father-in-law found Mark Madoff hanged with a dog leash in his New York City apartment.
Bernie, while I will not send you pictures of your grandchildren, there is one picture I do want you to see. What I saw when I walked into that apartment at 7:30 a.m. in the morning. I want you to see your son's corpse hanging from a rafter, his head at a left-leaning angle, looking down at you, asking, how could you do that to your son, who, up until 2 years before his death, had given you the greatest gift, his unconditional love for his father?
I called the prison. It was a chaplain or something, and he got Bernie. I think he told him before I spoke to him.
As soon as the chaplain came in to get me, I knew something happened.
Oh, God.
That's how they notify you here when someone dies.
Ruth must have been hysterical.
She was hysterical.
Was she mad, too, or just upset at that?
She was, I think at that time all she was just in shock.
Yeah.
You know, and angry at me, of course. How could she not be angry at me?
Yeah.
I destroyed our family. I didn't eat or I didn't come out of my room for days. You know, I didn't speak to anybody and so on. I cried in private because if they saw me, they probably would have put me in a suicide watch. And I blame myself 100% for my son's death. I mean, you know what it is to live with? Not a day goes by that I don't suffer. I may sound okay on the phone. Trust me, I'm not okay. I never will be.
Probably a majority of people can't believe that you can live with someone for 50 years and not know.
It's hard for me to believe, too.
Had you known, would you have turned him in?
I'm glad I didn't. It would have been tough, but I would have left. Whether I turned him in or not, I don't know.
All those same people out there who think that my husband killed himself because he must have known something, that couldn't be further from the truth. My husband's death was only proof of his pain.
What he did to me, to my brother, and to my family is unforgivable. What he did to thousands of other people, destroyed their lives. I'll never understand it, and I'll never forgive him for it, and I'll never speak to him again.
Peter Madoff pled guilty, and he was sentenced to 10 years. Frank DePascali, he died of cancer, so he was never sentenced.
Like my cousins in California said, you know, friend, you're funnier now than you were before. I said, I have new material. It's called poverty. We can't sit and cry. We gotta pick up the pieces and move on.
It goes over my mind all the time. I say to myself, how could you do this? Why did you do this? I still can't figure it out. I mean, look, I see psychologists here once a week, and probably will for the rest of my life. I mean, I can't believe that I did this. Something in me just allowed myself to do it, and I'll never understand it.
Just opened up my book, started reading the first sentence in the paragraph when I heard what sounded like a freight train coming through my bedroom. I jumped out of the bed, and then there was a thumping sound that consecutively got much faster. And with each thump, I felt the rig actually shake. Then there was an initial boom. The lights went out.
And there was a huge explosion.
The rig is blowing. The rig is blowing.
The explosion rocked the rig about 10 o'clock Central Time, spraying flames in every direction.
Well, I saw fire from derrick leg to derrick leg.
And you have oil and gas under pressure underground that erupts upward.
It was extremely loud. It actually started sounding like a living thing.
It's the sound of escaping gas, feeding the fireball, incinerating the Deepwater Horizon.
It's like you're almost waiting to die. There's people screaming. You feel the heat from the fire. I'm scared to death. I figured this is my time. I'm gonna die.
126 people were on board at the time of the explosion.
Some jumped more than 75 feet into the ocean.
The Coast Guard is pressing its search today for 11 workers still missing.
I started to have a bad feeling when the sun came up. It got very precarious at that time. Time was running out.
Deepwater Horizon, a state-of-the-art, semi-submersible, dynamically positioned by satellite drilling rig. And Transocean rents Deepwater Horizon to the big oil companies at about $500,000 a day. Now, what the oil companies use Deepwater Horizon for is to drill the wells. They come out, they drill in really challenging environments. They find the oil. Sometimes they set up the production well. Then they go to the next job.
It is different than any other job. A lot of people, when they first start out, they try to compare it to construction. And it's a completely different thing. Being away from your family, you know, if something happens, you can't just leave. It's all weather permitting.
These are our charts. And this is our tracking of Hurricane Ivan. Put a mark on that piece of paper where we's at.
Everybody out there gets kind of close. I mean, as far as friendships and stuff like that.
Are you gonna do some work now?
Really, I'm with them more than I am my own family most of the time.
All right, there's Yancey.
It's a little different than being home because you know, and it is dangerous. You never want to open cables are gonna break or the equipment's gonna fail.
This is our subsea control panel. This is used to shut down any blowouts that come from the subsea floor.
The guys you work with, a lot of times, they do have your life in their hands.
Busted!
We working.
Yeah.
That night was an amazingly calm night. Very little wind. I mean, it was just ideal. I just noticed mentally that evening at sunset how pretty it was. I was attending to paperwork. My mate, he noticed quite a bit of mud falling through the center of the rig. I stood up to see what he was talking about, and I turned around and I noticed the mud raining down. So I looked up at the side window, port side of the vessel, and I seen the mud come out. When the mud comes on top of the derrick, it's not good.
My room phone rang, and the person at the other end of the line there opened up by saying, "We have a situation." He said, "We have mud going to the crown." I was just horrified. I said, "Well, do y'all have it shut in?" He said, "Jason is shutting it in now." And he said, "Randy, we need your help." And I'll never forget that. And I said, "I'll be right there."
I contacted the Horizon Bridge on the VHF radio and advised him of the mud coming down and asked him what the situation was. With tension in his voice, he immediately advised me that he was having trouble with the well.
I came up to the bridge. At that time, I felt a jolt. When I felt that jolt, there was a series of combustible gas alarms that went off. Yancey came over and turned the CCTV over to the starboard side. And that's when I witnessed mud coming from the starboard side.
When I woke up, I heard like a loud buzzing. I wasn't sure what it was, so I just thought somebody was cleaning or something like that outside my room. So I just fell back asleep.
I heard a hissing noise and a thump. Within seconds of that, I start hearing beeping. And I'm hearing the beep, 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 beep. It's continuous. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's going on? And I'm trying to put all this together in my head as to the thump, the hissing, and now the beeps. I hear the engine start to rev. Normal operating RPMs to way above what I'd ever heard it run before. And it's continuously, steadily rising. And I knew then that we were having a problem. As I start to push back from my desk, the computer monitor exploded in front of me. All the lights in my shop popped. The light bulbs themselves physically popped. Now I know we're in trouble. I reached down to grab my door, and at the simultaneously of grabbing the handle, the engine goes to a level that is higher than I can even describe it. It's spinning so fast that it stopped spinning. And there was a huge explosion. That explosion blew the fire door that was between me and those spaces off the hinges.
It blew me probably 20 feet against a bulkhead, against the wall. And I remember then that the lights went out, power went out. I could hear everything deathly calm.
And I started trying to find my clothes in the dark. I grabbed my boots, put them on.
I couldn't see anything. I couldn't breathe. There was no oxygen. I crawled across the floor, found the opening, made my way out. Had a small pin flashlight in my pocket that I put in my mouth to try to see. I still couldn't see. I didn't know why I couldn't see. I just couldn't see anything. I made it to the next door by feel. And as I reached the next door, I reached up and grabbed the handle for it. It then exploded.
My next recollection was that I had a lot of debris on top of me. I tried 2 different times to get up, but whatever it was a substantial weight. And I told myself, either you get up or you're gonna lay here and die.
Dude, that was crazy when that bitch blew up.
The rig blacked out. I went over to the general alarm and hit the general alarm. Yancey made the announcement over the PA. Report to emergency stations and lifeboats. And at that point, I noticed that no one had hit any of the distress buttons. So I went over and hit the distress buttons and issued a mayday.
Crawling through the ECR, my arm wouldn't work, my left leg wouldn't work, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see. I knew I had to get outside to some fresh air. I crawl across the bodies of at least 2 men. I don't know their condition. I'm trying to get them to respond. They're not responding. I assume they're dead and keep moving because I know that I'm in no condition to help them. I can barely help myself at this point. So I was tripping and falling, trying to make my way to the outside watertight door. I get about halfway across it and I can actually start to see light, a dim light. So I assume I'm headed in the right direction. I keep going towards the light. Eventually I make my way outside. I got my bearings, got my eyes cleaned out. There was no walkway, there were no handrails, and there was no stairwell left. The wall, the handrail, the walkway, all those things were missing. They were completely blown off the back of the rig. One more step and I would have went in the water.
So I opened my cabin door. Right leg was hung on something, I don't know what still, but I pulled it as hard as I could and it came free. I attempted to stand up. That was the wrong thing to do because I immediately stuck my head into smoke. And with the training that we've all had on the rig, I knew to stay low. I got on my hands and knees, so I was totally disoriented. I'd lost orientation on which way the doorway was. And I remember just sitting there and just trying to think, which way is it? And then I felt something that felt like air. And I said to myself, that's the direction I need to go. That leads out. So I had to crawl very slowly because that end of the living quarters was pretty well demolished, debris everywhere. But I made it to the doorway, and what I thought was air was actually methane. And I could actually feel like droplets. It was moist on the side of my face. I continued to crawl down the hallway slowly, and I put my hand on a body, and it was Wyman Wheeler.
There's 2 lifeboats there on that lifeboat deck. And from what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt, I seriously considered launching a lifeboat by myself because I knew that something really, really bad had happened and it wasn't going to get any better anytime soon. I had an inclination that this was way worse than anyone could expect. And I thought about it for a second, and I remembered that I have responsibilities. I have a emergency station to go to. The problem was my emergency station no longer existed. So I made a decision to put my life jacket on right there and try to make my way to the bridge, which would be my secondary muster station. I determined if I couldn't make it there, I was going to come back and launch the lifeboat by myself.
I'm on the fire team, so I was trying to get to my fire station. My main fire station is the one in the back of the rig. And I could see it, and I could see that nobody was there, and there was a bunch of smoke around it. So I turned around to go back to the front of the rig. And that's when I saw the flames in the derrick. As soon as I saw that, I knew there was no way we were going to put it out. We were just going to get off of there, all sure. That's when my panic set in. I mean, that scared me absolutely to death right then. I've never had a feeling like that. The lifeboats are probably gone. I didn't know, I hadn't seen anybody until this point. I didn't know if I was the only person still on the rig or what. Yeah, that's all I kept thinking was, well, we're all dead.
I was relieved for the night. On the way home, I received a phone call. They said, we just had an oil rig explosion. You need to come back here as soon as possible, 5 minutes ago. So I said, okay, I'm turning around right now. I said, just throw all my gear in the helicopter and I'll change en route. Just ran right to the helicopter, hop in, and off we went.
As soon as we took off, I put my night vision goggles down, and I could see this immense glow on the horizon. It looked like I was flying to New York City. The glow was that immense. And normally, you might see a faint horizon or you see no horizon at all. And I told my crew, I said, guys, you see that light on the horizon? That's where we're going to. It sunk in right there that this is real, this is the real thing. We don't know what we're going to see when we get there, but we know it's big.
The next thing I recollect is I saw like a beam of light, like a flashlight bouncing, and I saw that to be Stan Carden. Well, about that time, Jimmy Harold came out of his room. He told me he was in the shower when the explosion happened. Managed to find a pair of coveralls and put those on. I said, Jimmy, I've got Wyman down right here. So we asked him to go to the bow and get a stretcher. We continued to remove this debris off of Wyman. I helped him up, and I was gonna try to help walk him out, thinking that might be quicker. He made a couple of steps with his arm around my shoulder. He was in pain. And then he said, set me down, set me down. So we set him back down. And he said, y'all go on and save yourself. You know, and I said, no, we're not gonna leave you. We're not gonna leave you in here.
Once I got on the bridge, I reported immediately to the captain that we have no propulsion, we have no power, and I said, you need to understand, engine number 3 for sure has blown up. We need to abandon ship now.
I turned around, I didn't recognize who it was at the time because he was covered in blood. It was Mike Williams, Chief ET. And I asked him, what do you mean gone? He said, they've blown up. They're all gone, they've blown up. On looking at the screen, there was still nothing. No engine starting, no thrusters running, nothing. We were still dead ship. Chris Pleasant, the subsea supervisor, was standing at the BOP panel. I hollered out to Chris Pleasant, have you EDS? He said he needed permission to EDS. Somebody on the bridge hollered out he cannot EDS without the OIM's approval. I hollered out, can we EDS? He said, yes, EDS, EDS. When I turned back to Chris, he was in the panel pushing a button.
I hit the EDS and I seen it go to close. And I was looking through that panel, trying to see what was going on. After I saw that I had no hydraulics, I had no pressure in the system that allowed those functions to work. I knew it was time to leave.
I hollered to Chris, I need confirmation that we have EDS. He said yes, and he pointed at a light in the panel.
Steve Bertoni, then he turns away and he said, I'm going to the emergency generator room, like that. And I said, you need me to go with you? And he didn't say nothing, but I looked out that door and I said, I ain't going.
When I left the bridge, I went to close the watertight door, and Mike Williams pushed the door back. And he said, you're not going alone, Chief. I said, well, come on. Paul Meinhardt, the motorman, also fell in line, and we ran towards the standby generator. As I was running, I looked up at the derrick, and I could see nothing but flames, because I could see no equipment whatsoever. It was solid flames. When we walked into the standby generator room, my thinking at that point was what remaining fuel would be in the riser, it would burn away, and we were going to need power as well as fire pumps. I hit the start button. There was absolutely no turning over of the engine. At that point, I said, that's it. Let's go back to the bridge. It's not going to crank.
On our way back to the bridge is when I noticed, I believe it was lifeboat number 1, had descended and was motoring away. They had descended and disconnected from the rig.
The captain yelled and said that we were abandoning. I went over to the PA and made the last announcement and said that we were abandoning the rig. Yancey, myself, and the captain were the last to leave the bridge, and we went down to a craft station where there were a few others.
We went down to the life capsule deck. Everybody was panicking. Some people were trying to stay calm and do what needed to be done. Like the chief mate, captain and stuff, they were trying to get the stuff handled the way they were trained and knew how to handle it. Some people were jumping off. Some people were holding people back from jumping off. They wouldn't let them. And then other people were screaming, we gotta get out of here. We gotta get out of here. So, I mean, there was a certain level of panic that everybody was in. It made things a little more difficult getting off the rig. I got in the number 2 lifeboat. Everybody was in there hollering and screaming, we gotta go. Derek's fixing to fall on us. They finally got everybody in there and shut the door. Then they released the lifeboat down to the water.
As we were making our way down the ladderway to get to the lifeboats, lifeboat number 2 descended. So now the 2 forward lifeboats are both gone. They're both unavailable. Once they go down, there's no coming back up because we had no power. There's several minor explosions occurring. Things are falling. You can hear stuff popping.
It seemed like an eternity. They came back with a stretcher. We were able to get Wyman on that stretcher. When we got outside of the living quarters, the first thing I observed was both of the main lifeboats had already been deployed and they had left. I also looked to my left and I saw Captain Kurt and a few of his crew starting to deploy a life raft. And we continued down the walkway till we got to that life raft. And we were able to catch the head part of the stretcher and assist getting Wyman into the life raft. And I think we actually fell trying to, get him into the life raft. But the main thing is Wyman was there. He didn't get left behind.
There was a lot of explosion still going on and immense heat. All the flames and heat from the rig floor were coming down the forward part of that deck, as well as all the flames and the heat from under the rig. They were meeting, I guess, in like a vortex or something right there at the life raft. But I can remember feeling the intense heat on my knees. I also heard screaming, "We're gonna die, we're gonna die." And I honestly thought that we were gonna cook right there.
I wasn't sure that the life raft was going to survive. There was a crowd of folks there trying to get into this small opening. There was so much heat coming up, I thought for sure the life raft was going to pop or melt, and the people inside were going to cook.
Moments after the rig first exploded, you can hear the roar. It's the sound of escaping gas, feeding the fireball, incinerating the Deepwater Horizon.
We was approximately 100 meters out. My guys instinctively getting the ship's FRC ready. I get the command to launch shortly after we seen the first 3 guys jump off the rig.
Multiple personnel on water. Any person that has any help will be really appreciated. Okay, C4 Lee is heading to your position. We'll be there approximately 1 hour, 15 minutes.
I knew this was big. I've never seen flames that gigantic before, that huge. This was like seeing hell on earth.
The next thing I knew, the life raft was descending. When we touched the water, I heard somebody holler out, "Where are the paddles?" I jumped out of the life raft. Chad Murray jumped out and was right behind me and grabbed hold of the rope on the side of the life raft and started swimming, trying to pull the life raft away. I was swimming on my side, looking up at the rig. I would say 25, 30 feet above me, there was a tremendous amount of smoke bellowing out from under the rig.
I asked the captain, "What about us?" He said, "I don't know about you, but I'm going to jump." So he actually jumped first. I waited for a minute because when I looked over, the life raft was basically right underneath me. So I waited for a minute and so that it could actually move out of the way. And I jumped. When I resurfaced, I had the life raft was like 10 or 15 feet away from me. So I swam to the life raft, and I seen captain and a few other guys that were on the outside of the life raft.
As we're swimming, trying to pull this life raft away from the rig, I got to a point where I could see the helideck. I witnessed an individual running at full speed across the helideck. When he jumped off the end of the helideck, he was still running. Just before he splashed into the water, he was actually looking over at us.
In our training, they teach you to reach your hand around your life jacket, take one step off, look straight ahead, cross your legs, and fall. The problem with that is there's now a life raft down there at the bottom. Maybe 90 feet, 100 feet. It's a long ways. So I took off running and I jumped. I cleared the life raft by a pretty good ways. Once I hit the water, when I came back up, I couldn't see anything again. Because now I've got a new set of problems. Oil, hydraulic fluid, gasoline, diesel, whatever it is that's floating on the water is now burning my entire body. I'm now covered in this sludge. I don't know what it is. It's burning. I can't hardly breathe, but I can feel the heat from the fire underneath the vessel. At that point, I started backstroking with the one arm and one leg that would work until I remember feeling no pain. I remember feeling no heat and thinking that that was it. I had died. Sometime later, something apparently woke me back up, a pop or explosion, something, and I remember feeling the heat again, starting to feel the pain come back, thinking I've got to swim, and I started swimming again. And I heard something in the distance. I heard over here, over here. I I was thinking to myself, what in the world can that be? Whatever it is, I'm going to go to it, and just started swimming as hard as I could to get to it. And then I felt something start lifting me out of the water. A small orange rescue craft had grabbed me and flipped me over into the boat. At that point, the guy said there's a raft in the water. We proceeded to go towards the rigging. Now we're close enough that I can feel the heat. I'm starting to feel the heat again. And I see the life raft, and it's literally still under the rig. And I can see people outside of it. We get up to them, throw them a line, they get tied on.
Then the fast rescue boat pulled us to the starboard side of the Bankston. The Bankston crew was throwing down Jacob's ladders to the lifeboats to where people inside can get up on deck. I seen Carl, the radar operator. He was taking muster. Asked him how many people we were missing. Come to find out, it was 11.
Dude.
We're flying as close as to a half mile to a quarter mile, circling the rig, looking for survivors in the water. We smelled the smoke, we smelled the oil, the fumes. We felt the heat through the cockpit. We felt it in the helicopters, you know, through the windshields. It really hits home and strikes you that, hey, we're flying at 300 feet and the flames are higher than we are, probably up to 500 feet.
I was looking into this burning hulk of metal, and it was like looking into the face of the devil. It was like a living thing.
They already had boats that were putting water on the rig. I don't know where they came from. They came out of the woodwork. They were there in no time. The Coast Guard helicopters were flying around.
We were hovering about half a mile to the east of the burning rig. Initially, we got the word that we were to pick up a critically wounded victim, so then we lowered our rescue swimmer to the Damon Bankston.
Swimming out swimmer. Swimming out swimmer.
The rescue swimmer, he's basically our paramedic. He's our assigned EMT, so he's the guy who knows the first aid.
Down there. Roger, hold position. I'm gonna bring him down. Swimmer's just below the rail. It's halfway down. Forward and right. 40. Okay, swimmer's on deck.
When the Coast Guard arrived, the rescue swimmer, he came in and he asked, who's the critical? Buddy Trahan was the worst. At that point, they brought in a gurney. I stepped to the backside of the bed to assist in getting Buddy on the gurney. As I rolled him, he was screaming and hollering that his leg was hurt real bad. He had a severe laceration on his leg. He also had a twisted and mangled lower calf. His fingernails were gone. He had a hole in the side of his neck. And I looked back, and Buddy's back was burnt from belt to head. Once we got him on the gurney, they took him out.
We went to carry him out after we strapped him in, and the supply boat was full of big containers. So you really had no clear path to the back of the boat. So we were like, man, how are we gonna get this guy out? We actually had to lift him up over these containers and got him hoisted up to the helicopter.
It's hard when you're departing a scene like that to know that there's still 11 people missing. Our mission was to return to base with a critically injured victim, but it still felt bad to leave the scene, but that was the tasking we were given.
It began with a powerful explosion, a column of flames shooting into the night sky over the Gulf of Mexico. The oil rig still burning and could topple into the water at any moment.
The source of that fire is predominantly coming from the wellhead itself. It's crude oil that is leaching from this wellhead. And as long as that crude is leaching, we're going to continue to see that fire.
After the helicopter left, I mean, it was like with wounded, just everything just kind of like fell in place. Finally able to start calming down.
And we sat there and pretty much watched the rig burn for 6 or 7 hours. It's something I'll never forget. The images just burn in my head. I'll never forget knowing that after we took the mustard and stuff, we figured out, we were missing 11 guys. And most of it, we assumed they were on the rig. We didn't know, and that was pretty tough not knowing.
I went home that morning, turned on the news, and then you find out, well, there's still 11 people missing. It's like, oh, it's like, man, I hope they made it. I just hope they made it off.
In the news, the Coast Guard is pressing its search today for 11 workers still missing on a burning oil drilling platform off the coast of Louisiana. Fireboats are struggling to put out flames triggered by the explosion on Tuesday night.
We left from the rig. We rode for probably a good 4 hours to another platform. The guys on that platform, they set down a bag with some cigarettes and some snuff in it and stuff, and some clothes.
The survivors who were not injured are now making their way to shore. They will be arriving here in port later this evening. The search for the missing will continue through the night.
A pair of Coast Guard cutters stayed out in the Gulf all night looking for these missing workers. They will be joined a little bit later by one of these choppers, which is set to leave at first light here. And as you can imagine, the longer this search and rescue mission goes without resolution, the more fear and concern grow.
When we got off the boat, they brought around 3 or 4 prepaid cell phones. And we're passing those around. Everybody was, passing, talking to their family for about 30 seconds. So they're just letting them know they were off the boat. That was the first time I got to talk to my wife. From there, we rode to New Orleans to the Crown Plaza. And we went in the back of it because they told us there was so many lawyers and media out front. They were making us go in the back, and all our families were waiting. That was the first time I got to see my wife. She ran up smiling, and then by the time she got her arms around my neck, she was burst out in tears. Both of us did.
We were on site about midnight, so we were only on site in a relatively short period of time. I started to have a bad feeling when the sun came up and we could get a more accurate assessment of the extent of the damage on board the oil rig. And you could see the derrick leaning over on the crane, and you could actually see what used to be incredibly stout steel sagging like a clothesline. It got very precarious at that time. And we were all very, very concerned that time was running out. But at around 10 o'clock, we could see the aft starboard corner starting to slowly drop into the sea. The loud groans coming out of this vessel as she broke up was becoming much more pronounced. We started to back off. A thick sheen of brown emulsified oil still on fire behind. I think, unfortunately for us, we were fighting a losing battle from the start. But you still feel a tremendous loss. You still feel a tremendous sense of failure. My thinking immediately shifted to that of the people on board. You're there to help the loved ones of those people that may be missing come to some sense of closure. It was quite a silence on the bridge. And I know we were all thinking the same thing. You feel the loss. You feel the failure. You feel it deep. And it settles in more and more as time goes by and as adrenaline subsides. You know, I'm still going over things in my mind.
There were 126 crew members on board the rig. 11 of the workers never had a chance. They were killed in the explosion. Their bodies never recovered.
These guys on the deep water are the fighter pilots of our profession. They are the rock stars. The very best of the best work on the deep water, and they don't accept anything less.
The Horizon was an exemplary rig with excellent personnel. They paid the ultimate price. They gave their life to try to minimize the damage that was done to people, property, environment. And I hope at least that message is clear, that they paid the ultimate price.